Saudi Arabia had a bad history with the Taliban. If you remember back in the 90s, I personally went to Mullah Omar at the direction of the king and the crown prince to try to get him to hand over bin Laden because of what he was doing to Saudi Arabia from Afghanistan. Unfortunately, Mullah Omar refused. And that led to 9/11 and all of the other things that followed. And since then, of course, during President Karzai's term of office in Afghanistan, he asked Saudi Arabia to mediate with the Taliban. So the kingdom, when King Abdullah was alive, received a delegation from the Taliban. And the kingdom told them, if you break with Al-Qaeda, we would be willing to negotiate and engage with you. They didn't. So the kingdom did not deal with the Taliban. However, that did not mean that the kingdom was not interested in finding a solution to the issue in Afghanistan. Just a couple of months ago, there was a meeting held in the holy city of Mecca between Taliban and government representatives from the religious aspect under auspices of the World Muslim League to try to get some kind of understanding between them. Obviously, that did not bear fruit.
Yeah.
Because what we see today is different. It's all political now.
When you think about that with regards to the Taliban itself, as you say, you've had a long history of dealing with them for decades. Negotiating with them or attempting to negotiate with them, in your view, was a mistake for the United States?
It's difficult to know what led the United States to negotiate with them, because I don't know.
Well, they wanted to get out, I assume.
That's true, but there may have been other factors as well, which I am not aware of.
Yeah.
But definitely, it was not the way to do it, to go behind the legitimate government and strike a deal and then come and inform. I remember the statements that used to come out at that time, Mr. Trump's negotiations with the Taliban. American officials were saying, when they were asked, have you gone behind the back of the government? They would say, oh, we kept the government informed. That's not the same thing as having them on board.
Yeah.
So that to me was the wrong way to do it.
What about what's happened in the recent days? We're talking about billions of dollars of U.S.-made weapons, everything from Black Hawk helicopters to night vision goggles, left behind by the Afghan army, and now presumably in the hands of the Taliban. And while I doubt that they're going to be flying the Black Hawk helicopters themselves, these weapons could presumably make their way outside of Afghanistan, end up in the hands of state and non-state actors. How worried about that are you?
It's very worrisome.
Yeah.
As much as the Taliban's still standing engagement with Al-Qaeda, which is also worrisome because, Al-Qaeda targeted the kingdom first before anybody else back in 1995. The first terrorist attack that Al-Qaeda took was against the kingdom before they expanded their activities outside, whether it was in the embassy bombings in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam or subsequently in 9/11 and in New York. So it is very worrisome, that aspect of it. And now with this weaponry that the ally of Taliban, Al-Qaeda, may get their hands on, it's going to be even more worrisome.
Given that 40 years of pain for the Afghan people, do you have any regrets about your role and Saudi Arabia's role in fighting the communists?
Not at all. It's two different things. When the Soviets invaded, the first victims of that were the Afghan people. The Soviet invasion led to these refugees to leave Afghanistan and seek shelter in Pakistan and in Iran. Not to mention the campaigns that the Russians took, military campaigns, against the villages and the towns inside Afghanistan to fight the Mujahideen. They basically destroyed Afghanistan at that time. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that they did is they actually kidnapped thousands of Afghani children and took them into the Soviet Union from the ages of 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 in order to bring them up as, perfect examples of communism. That is hardly reported nowadays. But the Soviet invasion was a horrible invasion vis-a-vis the Afghan people. And the kingdom's support for the Mujahideen led, with the United States support and the Pakistani support, to ending that unacceptable Soviet invasion. The break came when the Soviets left. Instead of the Mujahideen coming together and forming a government and going on from there in peaceful ways, they started fighting each other. And that's when the kingdom said, we're not going to give you any more support. Yeah. And actually stopped all support for the Mujahideen. And when the Taliban came to power in the 90s, again, the kingdom told the Taliban, we're not going to give you money because you're still fighting. You have to stop the fighting before we engage with you in development and economic support.
Obviously, there's a lot of questions about America's role within the region. Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires, the British, the Russians. How do you see this against that sweep of history for the Americans? Do you think that this is a watershed moment?
I am not comfortable with that term, watershed moments. I don't have the historical wherewithal to make a judgment on that. I think it is still too early to judge whether America is or is not in a watershed moment. And there is a lot of talk, even particularly within America itself,
yes,
about the waning of America. The American supremacy is disappearing. China is coming up. Russia is competing, etc., etc.
But you can tell a rising from a setting sun.
Well, I still think it's too early to rule out America and consider it as a setting sun. I think America has much within it to contradict that prediction. It is still a vital society. You look around you, yani, whether it is in inventiveness, in culture, in military abilities, in science and medicine and so on, America is pretty much still the number one country in the world. To proclaim that is all going to end tomorrow, I think is wrong. So I don't think I will see that in my lifetime. But I must tell you, Eddie, my lifetime is not going to be that long. I think, particularly around our part of the world, the kingdom's alliance with America goes back a long time. And my view of how Mr. Biden has treated the kingdom is not very positive.
Why?
Well, yeah, he prejudged while he was campaigning about the kingdom things, particularly on issues of human rights and so on, without giving himself the chance to see what is happening inside Saudi Arabia. There is a tremendous evolution taking place in the society in Saudi Arabia and in the government in Saudi Arabia on the issues of human rights particularly. And Saudi Arabia today is not what it was 20 years ago.
Not even what it was a few years ago.
Well, I have a longer perspective on that. So, because I think the ball started rolling for Saudi Arabia's progression 20 years ago, and in the 90s, when the late King Fahd set the committee to set up the basic law that defined what is Saudi Arabia and the relationship between the government and the citizen. That really opened the door for what is happening today. And of course, it has been much accelerated under King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. To the delight, if I may say, of the majority of Saudis. There are still a few diehards who don't like change, but they exist in all societies. But alhamdulillah, yani I can truthfully say that the majority of Saudis fully support what is happening today in Saudi Arabia.
Speaking of 9/11, the families of victims are still pursuing in the U.S. justice system attempts to sue various people within Saudi Arabia and the Saudi government for the events of 9/11. You have diplomatic immunity. Do you believe it's fair for those families to try to seek justice from Saudi Arabia for what happened?
I cannot put myself in the place of the relatives of the victims of 9/11. Their loss is something that I cannot even presume to understand or to share or to. But I do appreciate that any loss of life has its effect on the relatives of that person. What I do say is that Saudi Arabia has never hidden anything about that matter.
So you're not worried about anything that could come out from FBI documents, redacted information?
Not at all. We've seen what happened, if you remember, with the famous 28 pages that President Bush, excluded from exposure when the 9/11 report came out. Nothing.
So nothing in those pages you believe will surprise you or implicate Saudi Arabia in any way?
There is absolutely nothing. And I, for one, and I think all Saudis believe, as our foreign minister, the late Prince Saud, said in front of the White House when he met with President Bush, after President Bush kept those pages away from the report. He said, please, for our sake, if you think that this is going to help Saudi Arabia, it's not. Put everything on the table. So if there are still documents within U.S. archives that have not been put to the public, I think they should be brought out, because there will be nothing in them whatsoever. You know, America took investigative efforts to find the culprits behind 9/11. Saudi Arabia did too. After all, these were Saudis. We wanted to know who was responsible, if there was anybody responsible in Saudi Arabia for that. And we found absolutely nothing. So, yes, to the better exposure of the reality, I hope that the U.S. government releases all documents about 9/11.
Saudi Arabia is the biggest economy. It's the leader, if you'll say, of the GCC, for example, and in so many elements of the more broad Gulf Arab policy. For Saudi Arabia, what do you believe this foreign policy is going to look like post what we've seen in Afghanistan? Do you think that Saudi Arabia is going to take an even greater role in the region?
I think Saudi Arabia's position is based on not only its economic capabilities. You say it's the largest economy and so on. It's the leader of the GCC, etc. But it also has another role to play, which is leadership in the Islamic world. The two holy mosques of Muslims that millions of Muslims, billions of Muslims turn towards every day, 5 times a day, are Mecca and Medina, and they are in Saudi Arabia. And from that context, it has always been Saudi Arabia's role not only to protect these holy places, but to make sure that they become a focal point for the welfare, not just of Muslims, but of humanity. You know, Muslims make up something like 1/5 or a bit more than that of world population. So there is much to be expected from their role towards humanity. And this is where Saudi Arabia also has a distinct role from other countries. No other country in the Muslim world has these two holy places, the birthplace of Islam and the birthplace of the Prophet of Islam, but also the places where Muslims come together to perform their ultimate duty to God, which is the pilgrimage. So this puts a great responsibility on Saudi Arabia, and we have to make sure that our conduct toward these two places brings Muslims together rather than keeps them apart.
What about oil? Because the history of Saudi Arabia, at least in the 20th and 21st century, has been very much intertwined with energy. And you once told me that the energy market, the oil market, binds the world together. But while no doubt oil will remain a huge part of that energy dynamic in years to come, the world is changing. And Saudi Arabia's place in the world, no doubt, will change with it. How do you see that evolving?
You know, Ms. Gamble, if I may, I would like to ask you that question.
That's not fair.
Because you probably know more about that than I do. Not just from your own interest, but from all the people that you have interviewed. Since the issue came up, you know, when you started working in your job. But let me just say this: the kingdom is a partner with the rest of the world in finding the best usage for energy resources. God blessed us with very cheap fossil fuels. He also blessed us with very cheap solar energy. I think among the world's countries, we have probably the best or the highest receptivity of sunlight anywhere in the world. And that also helps us in providing us with alternatives to the fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. And the world is not going to give up the benefits of fossil fuels for my lifetime at least, if not for longer than that. So, but that doesn't mean that we're going to stick to that and refuse any other developments.
So in that transition, you don't see Saudi Arabia being left behind?
No, I don't think so. I think we're going to be in the forefront of countries that produce new energy, clean energy. Hydrogen, for example. You've seen the statements that have come out and the actual investments that the kingdom has put into producing hydrogen. As with other countries, you know, the UAE is doing the same thing. I think Qatar is going into that, and other oil-producing countries are equally interested in that.
What would you say then is something that the region needs to see today from the United States?
Well, that's a tall question that requires a tall answer. I think we need to be reassured about American commitment.
What does that look like?
That looks like, for example, not withdrawing Patriot missiles from Saudi Arabia at the time when Saudi Arabia is the victim of missile attacks and drone attacks, not just from the Yemen, but from Iran. I think that was not indicative of America's declared intention to help Saudi Arabia defend itself against outside enemies. That is what I would expect America, hopefully, to come back and tell us that, yes, we are committed to you and we will deploy whatever is needed for that. You know, the kingdom had to seek other support in that to bolster our air defenses against these attacks from Iran and from the Houthis in Yemen. We would have preferred that it would be America who would be doing that than others. And that is something I think that the administration has to consider seriously now, especially after Afghanistan and what happened and what is happening in Kabul. And it's not just Saudi Arabia, it's the other Gulf states who are equally vulnerable. We've seen attacks on tankers in the Gulf by Iran, and yet nothing comes in response from America. Now, whether the Biden administration will come through with that, I have no idea. But it is something I think that they should consider, just to reassure us that we can rely on the United States.